and welcome to One-on-One with XES. In this series, we bring to you one-on-one conversations with professionals from different fields of interest and expertise. I'm Madhu, I'm the marketing partner of XES, and we have a very interesting topic today, especially if you are an entrepreneur, a new startup, or even a young communications professional, that is, how to do PR for startups. And to address this issue, we have with us today Nina Enroth. Hello, Nina.
Hi.
So Nina is a communications professional with 20 years of experience in both agency and in-house. She's currently a part of the San Francisco communications agency crew and also runs its new venture Bay Area network of marketing freelancers. And you also shared with us you are a creative, results-oriented person, yoga enthusiast, and a people's person, which I can definitely vouch for, and couldn't think of a better person to talk about communication and public relations. So thank you for joining us and hoping to learn a lot from you today.
Thanks for having me, Madhu. Good to see you virtually again.
Yes. And if you are ready, I'm ready. Should we get started right away?
I am ready. I'm ready.
All right. So my first question for you is, it's a little bit broad question, but we are familiar with PR as a form of external communications or something to do with media, you could say. But can you maybe briefly elaborate what PR is, what it entails, and why should it be important for an organization?
Yes, definitely. I did get the questions beforehand, so I've had a chance to kind of think of my replies as well and what I want to share with people. And when it comes to PR, it's always good to remember that PR is not short for a press release, it's short for public relations. So it's not about mass delivering press releases to media. It's about building relationships with people who are relevant to your business. So when you are doing or thinking of doing PR, think about who you want to share your story with. Who do you want to get talking about you? Who do you want to actually share your story on behalf of you? And then kind of backcast and think, what media do they follow? Which news outlets they read? Do they watch the news on TV? Do they follow some blogs, for instance? And then dive into those media, find out who the journalists are, and then think of ways of sharing your story in a way that really interests the readers or watchers or whatever, so the customers of the journalist. And then start building a relationship. So it's not easy, but it's really impactful way of getting people to share your story. It's an excellent way to create awareness and credibility among the important audiences you want to reach with your product or with your service. And then one thing is that it's also a good way of getting SEO backlinks. If you get your story featured in some media outlet, it's hard to get otherwise.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Speaking of stories, now maybe I can ask a more burning question. What would you say is an ideal stage for startups in building connections with media or actually going forward and speaking about their own stories with them?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the answer is to do it as early as possible. Because you are building a relationship, you're not sharing just one story. Share your goals. You don't have to have a perfect product or perfect service or perfect business to be able to share that with the media. So get them on board your story, your adventure. Share your progress often. And then when you actually have something really, really interesting to share, then they already know who you are and who is this person approaching them, what is this company behind the story. And it's easier for journalists then to kind of really splash out your big news with their readers. If you wait, then you need to kind of play catch up. Or in worst case, there might be a competitor who starts doing their PR earlier, and then they get all the media space. So start early. Don't be afraid of being imperfect. It's good to share stories, not end results. That's my tip.
That's a very good tip, I think, especially that you said that not to be afraid and try and build the connections. But like moving on to a little bit practical question, do you have any suggestion for stories that startups could approach the media with? Because we only think, or even startups, I think, understand that maybe they could only speak with media about funding news and anything to do with finances as such in the initial stages. But could you suggest a few other stories that maybe would grab the media attention?
Yeah, obviously the funding news are interesting, but saying it, even with those, if you don't get a funding over 1 million euros, then just the funding isn't really that interesting. So you always need to think about the impact that you have on people's lives and share that story instead of just sharing the funding story. So think of what is interesting there. Then maybe if you do research and there's some interesting findings that come up, solutions to ongoing problems, for instance, share those. If you have some groundbreaking new products or product features, share those. Don't just tell about your product, tell about the impact again. So how does this product or feature change someone's life for the better? Interesting startup founder stories, especially the things that go wrong and what you've learned. That's always a good story to share. Significant new customers or partners, also obviously exits, and then other kinds of data-led topics. That's kind of connect your data to industry news, for example. Go back to who you want to talk to and what interests them, and then kind of think of if there's something worth sharing with these people, then try and come up with a pitch and a press release, and approach a journalist who could be interested in the story.
Yeah, thank you. Those are some very good tips. But I think all startups have a little bit of inhibition or prejudice against how to contact the journalist and what kind of relations should they build. So could you suggest some of the best practices, maybe for building media relations or working with journalists, especially for young entrepreneur or startups?
Yeah, well, it's really, really good to remember that the journalists are people too. So although they are the gatekeepers in a way, but they are people who have a job to do. And journalists always think about their readers first. So think of ways of helping journalists succeed in their job. And that's a good way of approaching PR. And like I said, it's quite rare to get like quick wins with PR. So start building the relationship with the journalists, with the media. Do your homework. Think of the journalist. Don't think of, no, I need to get into this and this media outlet. Think of how could I approach this or that journalist. Do your homework in a sense. Think of what they follow, what they write about, and then just offer them a story to share. They might say no, and that's okay as well. Startups and young entrepreneurs obviously do a lot of pitching anyway, and should kind of be accustomed to people sometimes saying no to them. So it's a bit similar with journalists, but it doesn't have to be personal. So build a relationship. Don't waste journalists' time by pitching irrelevant topics or stories, always personalize your contact with them. So don't send mass emails or mass deliver press releases. Send an email to a person or call a person, introduce yourself, be yourself, offer a story, don't like oversell anything. Have a conversation. Yeah, that's the big thing. I always like to think that, especially with startups or growth companies, the journalist doesn't know who you are. They don't know anything about your company. They don't know about your product. So you really need to start from scratch. You're not Apple or you're not Tesla, who journalists wait to hear from. So if you're Apple, it's okay to send out a press release and expect journalists to write about their topics, because they are really urgently waiting for new news. But when you have your new thing happening, you really need to start and build that relationship first.
Yes. Speaking of homework that you were mentioning before, from a marketing comms professional perspective, what would you suggest are few ways to keep up to the trends and do maybe media monitoring? Or should startups even invest in such media monitoring tools to stay on top of what's going on and which journalist is in their area of work?
I suggest investing in PR. If you decide to do PR, then you really need to invest on it. And it doesn't mean that you need to hire a expensive PR agency or partner, but it means that you need to invest either to an external partner, or then invest on doing things in-house. And even if you work with a partner, then you still need to kind of invest some of your time and effort to doing PR. Tools come second, in a way that you shouldn't go tool first, but obviously it is really important to measure what you do, so that you can really where you've been mentioned, what types of media you could approach, who are the journalists writing the articles in these media outlets. There are a bunch of different tools available. You don't have to go with the expensive ones, especially when you're starting. It's quite easy to do some things manually. And when you start having hundreds or thousands of media hits out there, then you maybe need to move on to more heavy tools for to keeping on track on what people write about you in different places. But to start with, I would first invest in doing PR, and then maybe doing some of the things manually, like the media survey, or media monitoring. When it comes to tools, we at San Francisco, for instance, do our pitching and press release deliveries from our own email boxes. So we don't use a mass send out tool for that. And that's because we believe in those relationships. Again, if you are a big company with a reputation and journalists expect to hear from you, then it's probably all right to use these tools that mass send out the press releases to journalists. But even with these big companies, a lot of their media coverage comes from the relationships their key people, their comms people have with the media. So good old dating, contacting people in good manner with interesting topics, and then thinking of the tools maybe a bit later.
Yeah, I think media relationships are very important, like one of the first important things that you should consider when even attempting PR or building those relations. But maybe as a media consultant now, could you suggest few tips that a startup entrepreneur maybe can use to prep for a first media interview or before sending out the first pitch, some things they should consider?
Yeah, for pitching, there are some, well, I must say that these two are quite different things to prepare for. Pitching, there are some best practices. I think I can never highlight enough the fact of thinking of the readers of the media. So think of what would they be interested in your story, and you need to personalize the pitch. If you are pitching to a tech media, for instance, or if you're pitching to an international news media outlet, then you need to think of a different angle of your story to these journalists. And then write about this. Share the most important thing first. Remember that people, when you're emailing someone, be it a journalist, a customer, whoever, you really need to pay attention to the topic of the email. So share the interesting thing already in the topic section, and so don't hide the interesting facts you're sharing. So start with that, then share facts. You can forget your adjectives, and then offer for someone who can give an interview or give further information for that journalist. So that's really like basically it's designing your message to fit the readers of the media and offering that story to the journalist. So figure out what the most important things about your story is for the readers, and then write a friendly email, personalized email to a journalist, and be prepared to share some more information on the topic if they get interested.
Yeah. The second part of my question was actually about interviews. So are there any tips that the person should keep in mind before going for that first interview?
Yeah, sure. It can be very exciting if you've never been interviewed by a journalist. And obviously, it's different whether you're interviewed on TV or for some online media article. But there are some tips, and the most important thing is to just be yourself and don't stress too much about giving the right answers. So be yourself. Most likely you already know your product or your service and your business. You know all the facts. You've been working with the product, for instance, for years or for a long time, and so there's no need to stress about that. But another thing is to think of before attending the interview session, is to think of maybe like 3 points that you really want to share with the readers of the media, and be prepared that the journalist might not ask the questions that these 3 things would be the perfect answers to, and just bring them up by yourself. So it's okay to also bring topics up with a journalist, not just wait for them to ask you questions and then answering them. And just keep in mind that those 3 things you want to say are relevant for the readers of the media. So that's always a really important thing, because otherwise they won't end up in the article or in the video or whatever the format of the news is. It's good to practice a bit. Maybe have a grilling session with your team members or with your partner or with a friend or with your mom. So it's good to have maybe an outsider, maybe someone outside your team is better than a team member. So you can have an outsider ask stupid questions about your service or your product or your story. And then you really need to think of answers that this person understands. So that helps you talk about your product or your business in a way that an outsider can really get a grip of. It's good to be able to keep things simple, and you always have your facts and figures and features in your back pocket when needed. Maybe there could be an industry media who want to be really in detail, but then there could be a news outlet who really want to stay on a broader level of the story.
Yeah.
But just be yourself, really.
Yeah, I think that's the most important tip. Yes. My final question for you is, basically there are so many myths associated with PR when it comes to working with media, so many inhibitions against it. What would you say are some of the don'ts, like absolute don'ts when it comes to working with media?
Yeah, there are some don'ts. Don't spam, don't lie, and don't focus on how awesome you or your product is. Think about the end customer of the journalist. Think about the impact you have on people's lives. No one really cares about you or your product, so that's good to keep in mind. It goes back to dating again and building that relationship. If you try and start a relationship by only telling about yourself, only talking about yourself, telling how awesome you are when it comes to different things, then most likely there won't be a relationship. So it's good to have that Tinder mindset when you're doing PR.
Yeah, those are some very good tips in a nutshell. I think our community members, we have many entrepreneurs on board and they will benefit a lot from what you shared today. So we can end it here. So thank you, Nina, for sharing. But I will still leave your contact details and the details of San Francisco agency and Bay Area, if that's all right with you, in our description, so people can connect with you if they have questions.
That's super. Thank you, Madhu. It's been a pleasure. Hope this is useful for the community.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Bye.